Next, we have Benoit de Ligneris, who's also one of the organizers of this meetup. Benoit has a PhD in physics, but he has always been passionate about computers. Oh, there we go. After a postdoc in distributed computing, he started a service company specializing in open source infrastructure, DevOps, and scientific computing. Intrigued by product, he sold his company and joined a library management system company to help modernize it and transition it to the cloud. After 3 years, he decided to relaunch a new venture in wine and e-commerce in Australia, and eventually decided to stay here in a cold country, Canada. He joined an e-commerce agency as CTO and then later joined Shopify. An avid reader, writer, and learner, lifelong sport enthusiast, including marathon, ultra, Ironman, and other crazy challenges. He is also a focused meditation practitioner and father of 3 teenagers. He practices his awareness, patience, and pedagogical skills daily. Come on up, Benoit. I'll hand it over.
Thank you, Robin. Cool. So fun fact, but my first ProductTank was in Sydney in 2016, and it was on job to be done. Woohoo! So there's like a cycle here. Cool. So I'm glad to be here, and I'm here because I organize. So we didn't have any speaker roster. So please, please, please come see us. You know, you have something to share, and we really want to have you here so that you can share your experience with all the PM community in Ottawa. This being said, I still hope the talk will be interesting, so we'll see. So my talk is about MoSCoW prioritization method, and before we start, so do you know MoSCoW? Ooh, a few hands here, okay. Have you used MoSCoW in one of your products? Oh, yeah, oh, cool. So, yeah, interesting. So MoSCoW is really a prioritization method, and we have more than one. I think one of the great benefits is really to create better and faster team and stakeholder alignment. This being said, I think as a product manager, we need to know why we are doing things. And before starting into MoSCoW, I think we should ask ourselves why do we want to prioritize. And so if we look at teams, I think the main goal is to improve the state of unaligned teams. So if you're not aligned, everybody's working day in and day out, long hours sometimes, but nothing is moving. And there are multiple reasons for that, but lack of trust is also a characteristic of it when it's happening. You also have a lot of passive-aggressive behavior where like everybody is fine, and then suddenly you have a lot of crises happening. You have very inefficient and unclear processes, tools, communication. Everything is hard, and you need to write a lot of spec as a PM and documentation and really come with a lot of things to just move the needle a little bit. Conflict are not a thing, so everything is fine. Everybody's happy, big smile. How is your day? Yeah, it's fine, but it's not moving. Nobody's taking risk. So each time you have risk, like you have risk-adverse people say, whoa, wait a minute, like, oh, what's going to happen with A, B, C, D? Commitment is low, and obviously accountability is also not there. So if you compare that to an aligned team, so it's a different story now, because once you have a clear direction, a clear why, everybody is now working together, at least in the same direction and with its own capabilities. And in these high-performing teams, you have trust. It's open discussion. Everything is fair game. You can talk and discuss about everything. It's efficient, as represented here. Like, we know where we are going, and we may have divergence and different opinion, but it's mostly on small things that can be solved rapidly. Conflict is part of the game. Healthy conflict where everybody can argue and really come up with some, like, sometimes hard and ruthless prioritization as a PM. We are part of that, but we still accept everybody's opinion. High risk taking, obviously we are ready to take risk, and we had success in the past, so we really want to iterate on that. And then you have high commitment, good personal accountability, and of course clear agreements. So, of course the goal is to move from unaligned to aligned, and most of the prioritization methods are doing that. And we'll just see 3 benefits before that. So the main benefit, once you prioritize, is you can really clearly communicate what your product is doing to all the stakeholders. And that's super important because it really allows you to have the right level of discussion, the right level with the right persons. You can also communicate with the organization. And like in larger companies, so we don't know what everybody's doing, and we often refer to like the brief or the priorities of the current team. And if it's not clear, if you don't understand anything, you will not be able to help or assist that team, basically. If it's on the opposite side of things, if you have clear understanding, then now you can really make a decision and decide to contribute. And the last benefit, I think it's quite important. If you don't have any priority in front of you, then it's super hard to say no with empathy, because everybody's opinion is as good as yours. But the minute you have a clear and prioritized functionalities or requirements, so now you can really say, well, oh, that's an interesting idea. Let's sit together. Let's have a look. Let's look everything we're doing, and where do you see your wonderful functionalities that will improve our conversion by 25%? And now you can really say no with empathy and say, well, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's put it in, some place in the backlog. And do you agree? Everything else is high priority. So yeah, the goal is to reach that point. And I will really encourage you to be mindful about which method you choose, because some methods are good for certain problems, and some methods are very bad for the same problems. So I just draw a little graph here, like you have from complex to simple, from left to right, and then broad scope, narrow scope. So I really think that MoSCoW is great for things that are already kind of scoped and simple. If you have something super complex, like a backlog of 150 functionality across 3 teams on 3 product areas, don't use MoSCoW. Clearly, it's not going to work ever. Use something like scorecard method like RICE, and like I put another method in the middle. But yes, so basically, depending on the alignment and the type of product you are managing, choose the corresponding method, and don't try MoSCoW on all your prioritization efforts, because it could not work most of the time. So now back to MoSCoW. So MoSCoW is an acronym, obviously, and it's really a simple 4-quadrant matrix that consists of the must-haves for the M, should have, could have, and won't have. And so now we're going to go quadrant by quadrant, and after that we'll see also what I think is super important, but it's how to guide or organize a MoSCoW prioritization meeting. So some tips and tricks on how to use it in real life versus just the theory that we're going to see. So the must-have, so some adjective definitions, yeah. So your definition may vary, but I think like that's a bunch of characteristics that you can use as criteria and really see at the end of the exercise if like everything you must-have quadrant is actually responding to these qualities. So obviously it has to be required for the release, so that's something you need to do to have the outcome you expect. So that's high level, but if it's something you're not sure, it's not required, like clearly must-have is not the right quadrant. Think of it as a skeleton for your body. So you want to have a body, you have a skeleton, it's strong, it's solid. So if it's not something that looks like a skeleton, feel free to really discard it as well, because that's what it should be. It has proven value. So prioritization is about certainty and removing ambiguity. So if you have some elements in the must-have that you're not sure or people are not sure, then it will really diminish all the prioritization effort, because it will be easy for stakeholders or anybody to say, well, that's not true. And if that's not true, all that quadrant is clearly at risk to be like ignored or not considered. So like do your work and make sure that it has really a proven value. If you're not sure, like data research, market research, move it to should have, but really make sure that it has proven value. Same analogy, it's a vital element, it's like the heart, so you cannot live without a heart, so you really need to make sure it's vital. If it's not, if it's like a finger, clearly it should not be a must-have, and the same thing, so you have to be honest to build trust with your team and your stakeholders, so remove it. Prerequisite, it's another thing, and then there's also an acronym called minimal usable subset, so it's not MVP, but it's the same concept. You really need that minimal functionality to get this particular release running. Next quadrant is should have, same thing, so we'll go through some characteristic. So it has an impact, so you're quite certain that it will impact your product, but maybe you're not sure of like you have uncertainty and ambiguity, but still it has to be impactful. If it's not indispensable, if it was, it would be in the other quadrant, so it's like negative definition, but you have to check. MoSCoW, I didn't mention it, but it's really for the next release. So you really have to time box your MoSCoW prioritization. It's not for the next 10 years. It's like you really want to have clarity on the next 6 weeks or your next release. So clearly should have, maybe you cannot fit that into the current cycle and you want to do it later. So they are a good candidate for that. If it's something you believe you will do in 2 years, clearly it's not at its place. We go now to the could have, so it's easier. It's a kind of, yeah, maybe, seems like a good idea. It's where most of your conversation with stakeholders and people wanting to influence your prioritization should go. Oh yeah, cool, yeah. So is it more important that must have? No, should have? Yeah, maybe not. So could have. And I think you should really mention it that, yeah, it's important. I listen to you. And I'm going to put that requirement or functionality on my list, but not for this release, and most certainly not for the next one. Maybe you're lacking data, you're uncertain, it seems like a good idea. So also the could have quadrant is a good mine for user research, market research. So like trying to bring more clarity on these things when it's risky is also helpful. Sometimes you need dependencies, you know you cannot build it now, so you just use that as a placeholder, basically. So the won't have are quite interesting because you have 2 ways to define what you're doing. You can say what you're doing, but you have the opposite face. It's what you're not doing. And that's also super, super important. Like it's used in brainstorming to try to have good ideas. And that's the same thing. Some stakeholders only care about what you will not build. They are thinking like that in terms of white space, black space. So you're really giving all these different people a way to understand clearly what the scope of your project is. And that's also where you can clarify things. So each time you have a conversation, and no, we are not building that. Like, record it in won't have. It's not in scope. It's not something I'm going to build. So the criteria are, yeah, not in this release. You document the no as not yet, because same thing, it's time box. It's for the next release. We're going to revise it in 6 weeks or in next months. So you can also say to your stakeholder, well, no, won't have now. We discussed that. Yes, next cycle, we'll have another look at it. And maybe it will make the cut. Use the current cycle, use the time box. That's really the tool you can use to make sure you have a nice won't have quadrant filled. So once we've seen that, maybe like 2 different ways to run a MoSCoW meeting. So the first thing you need to prepare, and as I mentioned initially, you need some kind of scope. So like you really need some kind of documents to be ready. Send them to your team. So whatever you're using, a brief, press release, a why has to be quite clear and agreed upon. You already have resources, obviously. You convince some stakeholders that you need a team to work on that problem. And so once you've sent that, make sure that everybody has reviewed it, maybe one-on-one, depending on how you're working. So now you can invite the team. And the team can be extended. So you really need the core team members, all the people that are going to contribute and work on that product. You also need sometimes passionate stakeholders. So some stakeholders really want to participate to how you're going to prioritize and so on. And a lot of time for me, it's been a question of passion. So people are really passionate about a specific problem. And yeah, so you can invite them. So they will have really the right to influence and guide the team and provide all their point of view and sometimes their knowledge so that they are really more engaged into the scope definition. And then, yeah, you can just report to them and do what you're doing usually. Other things that you can, other people you can invite are subject experts, so subject matter experts. Maybe you don't have all the knowledge in the team, maybe a data scientist, maybe a market expert, so that you really can make better decisions. It's your choice. But yeah, so send the invitation, book 1 hour. Really, I tried longer. It's hard to have everybody, debating and contributing and being engaged for more than that. And if you're not over after 1 meeting, just rinse and repeat. We will see that, but it's better to leave maybe a week before your meeting so that everybody has time to think, has time to review. You will have a lot of chat, a lot of comments maybe in your document, and then you can do it again. And then decide on an approach. So that's where I think I tried like a few approaches. So one of them is if you have a weak alignment with the team. So you really start with the easy discussion, could, should, just to get everybody brain, engaged and start discussing some things that are not too controversial. But then you really move from soft to hard. So the must-have and the could-have at the end. That's a nice way to introduce the method. Also, if you're not sure, it's the first time. It's cool because, yeah, you basically give time to everyone to understand how it's working, and you're making maybe less consequential decision at first, and then the more important decision toward the end of the meeting. Other solution, you have a strong alignment already, and you just want to go or to dive in. So you start with must-have and won't-have, basically, and you really try to scope, what is not in scope. You have a big list, and it's going quite fast most of the time if you have already alignment within the team. So, and then you're more like future planning in a way, should have, could be discussed, but it's not as important, especially if you have clear must have, won't have, you already know what you're doing, and now you can really iterate on that. Some tips and tricks. So yes, first one is really control the timing. Don't try to solve everything after, like when only 10 minutes remains, just stop everything. Hey, we need to end up in 10 minutes. We just review everything, and you review literally each quadrant, everything that has been discussed, so that you start, practicing the message and helping all the team, thinking about everything that was decided. If not complete, I mentioned it, but don't try to discuss in the hallway with 3 people and try to complete the spreadsheet and so on. No, it's not working. Just book another meeting. Take the time between meetings. And when you restart, you're doing it literally like the end of the meeting. You restart with everything you agree on. And the reason is most of the time you have 80% agreement, maybe 20% disagreement. And if you start with a disagreement, it can become nasty quite rapidly. So really practice and start with what we all agree on, and then move to the most difficult subject. And then you continue the process. Another thing is, well, if people use that, then this is a live document. So you can really keep it up to date. Each time you are doing things, you can check box. It's done, it's done, it's done. Sometimes you are changing things. And so yes, I use a small reference. So to do, it's like a checkbox to do. Team is aligned, but it's in the correct quadrant. We are not doing it right now, but we are aligned. So to do is only for the must have. Everything else is for all columns. So sometimes you discuss with your stakeholder, but not with the team. So you're really adding something, but nobody's seen it. So use a question mark, and then the next meeting, review all these question marks together and see if everybody share your opinion on where it should go. That's a pig nose. That's our emoji when we disagree. So sometimes you can just, hey, we disagree on that, let's continue. And you will revisit next meeting. And same thing, maybe a stakeholder is strongly opposed, so you can really, hey, okay, I'm listening to you, I'm going to note that, and then we can discuss it at the next meeting. And when it's done, that's why it's live and it's helpful, and you can really put it on the spreadsheet. So that's an example, super simple, your 4 quadrants, you have your symbols here, your project, your release, and then you can really list it there. So I have a link to the Google spreadsheet template. As a conclusion, I think it's a super simple and easy to use prioritization method with the goal not to produce a spreadsheet, but to align the team, and then being able to communicate that efficiently with both stakeholders and the organization. It's excellent for pre-scoped product or feature that you kind of have already a good idea of what it is. And it's not good for quite complex or very broad product, something like, I don't know, front end and back end and API and partners and 5 type of users. I don't think it's a great prioritization method for that. And then one of the big benefits is once you've done that, you have a 1-pager with everything the team is doing. And that's super powerful, both for the team and then for the organization. And then, bonus, keep it live. And now it's really becoming the document of reference to also communicate the advancement of your project and any change in scope. I have a link to a Medium article. So yeah, you can learn more here. Thank you. Oh, 1 minute for questions or question. I think it's mine, actually, but yeah. Thank you. I just noticed before the talk, so.
So I've run the MoSCoW prioritization before, and one thing that kind of became evident was that everything was a must-have. Have you run into similar challenges, and have you employed any kind of constraints to make sure that there's some kind of limitation on the amount of things that can be in that must-have quadrant?
Yeah. So yeah, everybody wants its own functionality or whatever to be in the must-have, and that's like a human nature, I think. So yeah, depending on who and what. So one thing to use is the time box thing, because like if you're doing that only for a cycle of 6 weeks, so you have a lot of things you can do, but you cannot do all of them. So that would be one way to really, hey, engineering team, do you think you can ship all that? No, no way. And now you come back to, okay, so what's most important into that? And you move everything else to should have, just because, yeah, it's time box. So I think that's one of the main forcing function of the prioritization method, is that you cannot do everything. And then once you have agreement that you can ship all that, now it's good, and you move everything else to should have, and it will be next iteration. So now it's a bit less 0-1 thing. It's, oh, we cannot do everything, and if everybody agrees that it's high priority, then now we need to slice it into iterations that we can ship. And if you do that, then I think it's going well, actually, because naturally everything that is less priority will move to should have, and some of the things will never be shipped, I guarantee you. But you only have to focus on the 6 weeks and just come up with, hey, let's be realist here. That's the team we have. So how do we pick? So that would be an answer. Thank you.